He's also a colonial culinarian, which is very interesting to us. So we're very lucky because we really found the perfect person to talk about Thanksgiving today. And we also have with us Boris Vejdovsky, who is a professor of literature and culture, American literature and culture at UNIL in Lausanne, and with Bonardi, who is you're Swiss and American, or just American? I'm sorry.
Well, both, but
both,
I'm more Swiss than American.
She lives in Switzerland, and she's a comedian, right? and she's here to talk about how we live Thanksgiving when we live away from home, right? So to start with the discussion, I'd like to ask Kathleen to talk about the history of Thanksgiving a little bit, and maybe why it is really related to Plymouth, or at least in some stories people like to tell.
All right, so in 1620, an English ship came to New England. It was bound for Virginia, but the currents wouldn't let it go further south in the month of November. So they turned around and found a place what they said was fit for habitation. And that place had been named Plymouth by Captain John Smith. So that's a good place to have something that's already on the map so other people can find you afterwards. And before it was named Plymouth by Captain John Smith, it was known as Patuxet. And for several thousand years, a group of Wampanoag, indigenous people, had lived in that town. And between 1614 and 1617, they had died of a plague, and those who had survived had moved away. So the people who came in November of 1620 found 40 acres of cleared ground in the midst of a forest. And if you're a farmer, and you have to clear trees, or you can choose land that's already cleared, you're going to choose land that's already cleared. So the people in Plymouth settled there. They started their town. They built a common house. They built several other houses. A few months later, a native man walked into the town and said, "Greetings, Englishmen," in English, because he had been trading with English fishermen. And he offered to help them to learn to plant the native corn. So the English brought wheat and barley with them, but the crop that grows best in New England is maize, or Indian corn. So they planted their English crops as well as this new grain to them. And when they had their harvest in, and they don't mention this all as a cause and effect, but the English wanted to celebrate their harvest, which was a long tradition back in England and in most of Europe, actually. A good harvest is call for a big party. And the native people came with their king, the Massasoit Usamiquin, and they spent 3 days together celebrating. And that later on became the basis of an annual tradition of celebrating, which was called Thanksgiving. And then it gets even more complicated, but we still have Thanksgiving as a national holiday in the United States. It is the next Thursday. It's always on a Thursday, so it's a different kind of holiday than our other holidays. And that's sort of the bare bones start of it all. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So I was wondering, can you tell us, since you're a colonial culinarian, what's the first Thanksgiving, this first celebration you just told us about, what looked like? What did they actually eat on that day? Can we know?
Yeah. So we know a few things. We know that they went out a-fowling, and that means they went to hunt the wild birds that are in the place. So there are different kinds of ducks available, different kinds of geese, and yes, there are wild turkeys in Plymouth as well in the 17th century. So they were probably on the menu. But also things like quails and passenger pigeons. So fowl is just about any bird that flies that you want to put on your table. So I look for these sources, what the people in New England say that they're doing and looking for. And then I go back to English cookbooks and to see, well, what do you do with those sorts of things? So young birds are roasted, and they had plenty of wood in the country to make roasting fires. Older birds are boiled up, and you add things from your garden like carrots and onions or turnips. So those are different ways to cook up the same bird. So you would see a variety of these things on the table. They also lived on the coast, and they are making their living by fishing. So there might very well have been some fish on the table. And at that time of year, there's cod available. There's the last of the bluefish is available, but they're also looking, and they talk about several times, they wait for the tide to go out, and they eat things like clams and mussels, because you don't need a boat to go out to get those. So that's the easiest sort of food, to wait for the tide if you live on the shore, and bring back clams and mussels and lobsters. So they have those available as well to fill in all the cracks. And they have their harvest. We know they had their Indian corn, but this is a new grain to them. So how are they cooking it? So how do they cook oats? How do they cook wheat? They're boiling things up in porridges. They're trying to make flatbreads out of it. So there's all of these different sorts of things that we're looking for here.
And is it Thanksgiving still about food? Maybe that's something I could ask to Boris also, but maybe you can start with that, and then Boris can tell us a little bit about it.
Thanksgiving is still very much about food and who you eat with and what you eat. And turkey is very common on the table. That has become the predominant bird in America. And the people who raise turkeys, this is their big time of year to sell lots of turkeys. And then you have all the different side dishes, and it sometimes depends on what your grandmother cooked. It depends on what's common in your region. But also in America, people, many of them came from other places. So what are the sorts of foods that remind you of home that you're going to put on a table to celebrate? So there's lots of side dishes, there's and lots of desserts, lots of pies, and sometimes cakes on the table afterwards as well. So it's a lot of eating.
Do you want to add something about, Thanksgiving was the first harvest celebration for us, as far as I can understand, in the US. So it was really about food, but is it still something that's related to food and harvest and...
As Kathleen was pointing out, it is very much about food, and I think it's very appropriate that we should be talking about it here at the Alimentarium about food. But it's really at the intersection between religion, politics, and anthropology. Anthropology, because all cultures have always celebrated harvests, but this takes place the last Thursday of November, a long time after harvests have really taken place in New England. And so this gesture is also a religious gesture. The first colonists, otherwise known as pilgrims, or self-named pilgrims, in 1620, gave gratitude to the Lord for the special providence that brought them safely, or almost safely, to the shores of America. And it is a time when, and I think it's worth remembering, when the United States of America doesn't exist, and it's far from existing. It's another 150, almost 160 years before the US would emerge. And yet, it becomes the symbolic celebration of America coming together. So it's a myth of emergence that takes place on the shores of Plymouth in 1620. And this myth projects itself into the future, into contemporary United States of America, even though when it is first celebrated, the US doesn't exist and nobody is thinking of founding the United States of America. And so you have this nationalist idea of an emerging nation. So that's the political, the religious. The Lord brought us over, crossing this Atlantic desert to this wilderness, which we're about to turn into a garden. And it's anthropological because there's food. And Kathleen told us about this first winter, and those immigrants to those shores barely made it the first winter. Many died. And they made it across the first winter thanks to the help of the local populations, Native Americans, AKA Indians, who helped them finding food, finding indigenous crops, finding indigenous fowls, etc. And so the first Thanksgiving is also this mythical coming together of the people from the outside coming across the Atlantic with the local populations, the Wampanoag and the Narragansett tribes who lived there. And so it becomes this symbolic moment in 1621 of these peoples coming together. Tragically, the history then develops differently, as many of us know, but this is an important mythical moment for the U.S.
I was wondering when you said religious, because I've lived in the U.S. and I've lived in New York, more precisely. And in New York, Thanksgiving is the only day when everything is closed and everybody is celebrating. And never mind where you come from or what's your religion. So it's very interesting to me that you mentioned it's religious, but it's religious in a broad way.
Absolutely. So yes, it is religious, as you say, in a broad way, but I should specify that and say it's American democracy. That becomes a form of secular religion, and what is being celebrated is the thanksgiving not only unto the Lord, whatever Lord you may or may not believe in, but it's also a celebration of this coming together of the United States. Once again, a completely fictional idea in 1621, and something that is projected retrospectively onto these first colonial moments. So the Thanksgiving celebrated today, as you rightly point out, probably the most important national celebration. I'm sure Kathleen has tons to say about that, about the way transportation, everything basically breaks down in the US because everybody wants to go home for Thanksgiving. It's the busiest day in US airports. It's religious in that sense, in the sense that it brings people together. Etymologically, religio means bringing together. Right? So in that sense, yes.
Can you tell us a little more about the end of the story? Because you just mentioned it, but what happens after Thanksgiving for the Native Americans in the Wampanoag? I mean, precisely.
Of course, the history between European descended colonists and the native population is a long and vexed and difficult one. So the first Thanksgiving in 1621 is celebrated with the Wampanoags, thanks to Squanto, that English-speaking Native American man who helps, who is this go-between between the two cultures. And we know of these things thanks to a man whose name was William Bradford. And William Bradford was the second governor of the colony of Plymouth, and he wrote a book called Of Plymouth Colony, and he gives us many details about this thing. Tragically, he also presided over one of the next Thanksgivings in 1630, if memory serves, and that one celebrated the victory of the colonists over the Pequot tribes. So there was one of the first Indian wars, and the colonists beat the Pequots, and it was one of the first tragic, large-scale tragic events confrontations between the two groups of inhabitants of the North American shores. And that too was celebrated by Thanksgiving in 1630. And so we see how the political dimension of Thanksgiving evolves over time, and how it becomes very important over time.
So luckily we remember the 1621 Thanksgiving and not the other one, but it's still important to talk about it. And
I'd just like to add something else. Between 1620 and 1630, there were 600 Europeans living in all of New England. In 1630, the first large migration came from Massachusetts Bay Colony, and 2,000 people arrived, and 20,000 Englishmen came between 1630 and 1640. So that's part of what changes it. It's that the numbers change so significantly too. So that's what I mean. The history is really, really complicated. So there's days of Thanksgiving that different religious groups will celebrate if you have an occasion to be thankful that doesn't ordinarily include a feast. There are celebrations that include feasts. And so in America, these things have all become mixed up as one. So, yeah.
And what about the Wampanoags in Plymouth today? Do they celebrate Thanksgiving too? Is it important to them?
Since 1970, there was a Thanksgiving celebration that included a Wampanoag man to give a speech, and at the last minute it was decided his speech was too political, and so he was forbidden to speak in public. So a group of Indigenous people came into Plymouth to protest that. And so they have a very different way of remembering the day and keeping that day. And so it is not a day that they call a day of Thanksgiving. Before COVID, these groups of Indigenous people from all across the country were getting together, and they were telling about their cultures, and it was actually becoming a very educational opportunity. And in the last few years, we haven't seen quite as much of it, but we work at our museum here. We're called Pilgrim Hall. We were founded in 1824. But we have a Wampanoag advisory committee. There are still Wampanoag people who live in the town of Plymouth and who live nearby in places where their people have lived for thousands upon thousands of years. And so we are working with them. Mm-hmm. So they haven't gone away. They're still here. Mm-hmm.
It's nice to hear. Thank you. Wave. Can you tell us, maybe we can open up a little bit the conversation. We had very serious subjects, so maybe we can open up to what Thanksgiving means when you live abroad from home, because it's really an American holiday, as you were saying, Boris. It's really something that makes up the nation. And does it make any sense to celebrate it in Switzerland?
Well, first I'm gonna specify that I'm not like I'm more home is Switzerland. I was born in the States, and I grew up in Switzerland with my Swiss mom, so I didn't grow up in an American culture. And then I lived in America from 20 to 25. It's when I celebrated my first Thanksgiving. And then when I came back to Switzerland 10 years ago, it was very important to me to maintain the tradition and to celebrate Thanksgiving with my friends and to share with them what it meant to me. And it was really to have a special moment with your loved ones around like this special menu. And at the beginning, the first years, I was cooking like the whole menu by myself for up to 20 people. And after a few years, I was like, okay, that's too much work, because it's like a full menu is a lot of work. And so I started like shared. Okay, you can do the green beans. You can do the sweet potatoes. At the beginning, I was a little bit of like a control freak. Like it has to be done a special way. But it's not the point for Thanksgiving. So I really wanted to share with them. And obviously the turkey is a very big important part of the menu. And each year, like it's we give a name to the turkey, and it's the same name every year, but it's like it was Bettina the first, the second, and the third, and it begins the night before because I massage the turkey with salt, and then I let it soak all night in the water, and then and then it starts in the morning because I do it a slow cooking way, so it can be very juicy and tender. And so each year my friends gather, and they not necessarily all know each other, but they can meet up at each year at Thanksgiving, and so we share the meal, but there's the gratitude moment and the giving thanks, and this is, I think, like the most precious moment of the night because it's the ritual part of the night, and each year we may have some have a good year, some had a bad year, but it's the ritual part of like really acknowledging all the things that we can be grateful for. And in Switzerland especially, we have a lot of things that we can be grateful for.
And Boris, do you celebrate Thanksgiving too?
I celebrate Thanksgiving with my American friends. So whenever I run into someone who's willing to do all the work like you, I do. And for all my American friends, this is, as you rightly say, a time of remembering home. People remember all of a sudden that they're far away from home, right? And if they can't fly home for Thanksgiving, they'll organize something for whoever is American around them, but also the significant others of those American friends and relatives, and the extended family created around that, right? So it's really about, as you very rightly point out, a moment of putting it's a gathering of the tribes, really. You gather people around the table. You offer food, too much food. That is the principle. There needn't be enough to eat. There must be too much to eat. That is the idea. And then everybody has their own recipe, their own way of fixing the turkey, but it's always wrong. Only your mom knew how to do it right, or your grandma. That was the only right turkey on earth. And so that's really the celebration consists in that. Really, it's this coming together, which is lovely most of the time. But there's also the strange people who come. You know, in the U.S., it's the strange uncle you don't talk to usually, but who comes over for Thanksgiving. You have them on the phone once a year, but that's about it. But then they come to dinner. You have an alcoholic stepfather somewhere, you know, who also comes, who starts on the martinis a little bit too early and that sort of thing. But it is that, yeah.
That's very nice to hear. And do you do the gratitude moment too? I've never heard about it, but I know that's what Thanksgiving is about. So I'm interested in knowing if people talk about gratitude on Thanksgiving. Do it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think it very much depends on who's around the table. People will be grateful in general for, you know, whatever life has brought to them. More religiously oriented people will say a prayer, or will say something that is more specifically a giving of thanks in the religious sense of the word. But the particularity of Thanksgiving is that it really brings people together of very different horizon. So you will have people of different age group, political groups, religious groups, and therefore there is a sort of coming together of gratitude, which is no longer contained in one particular dogma, in one particular religion, or something like that. So it very much depends on the group, but everybody feels it as a special occasion. Right? Everybody feels that it is a special occasion.
But when we do Thanksgiving, like between the main meal and the dessert, we do the giving the Thanksgiving, but it's also like we go around the table, and I always say that it's not mandatory, like, because not everyone is comfortable to share, and it can take like different forms. So I say it's okay also to have like a silent gratitude moment, and sometimes people don't feel comfortable and they pass their turn. So it's really up to them, but it's always like delicate to bring that moment because everyone is laughing and talking, and so it's always okay. Now we're gonna take the time to give thanks, but it's always appreciated by everyone because it's also like sharing part of the celebration.
And Cassie, is it the way you celebrate it too? I'm sorry.
Excuse me?
Do you have that kind of moment too when you celebrate Thanksgiving?
So my family, my mother was born in Italy, and so no one in her family had ever cooked a turkey before they came to America. They used to do a chicken, so she learned about Thanksgiving as she was going through elementary school. She was the youngest, so she was bringing Thanksgiving home to her family. They never had cranberry sauce until my uncle was in the Army and had Thanksgiving in the Army, in the American Army. And he said, no, I know we have to go into the grocery store and look for this Ocean Spray cranberry sauce. And so that was always the cranberry sauce I grew up with. Ironically, I grew up down the street from the Ocean Spray factory because we moved away from the city. So we lived near where the cranberry bogs were, which none of my Italian relatives have ever seen until they came to visit us out in the middle of nowhere. So there are those sorts of things, but moments of gratitude are very common. And I think different TV shows and different movies show everyone sitting around the table showing gratitude. So that's something that seems familiar to people, even if they've never done it before. So you kind of know if it's Thanksgiving, then this is what that's what you're supposed to do besides, eat yourself silly. It's just really interesting how the holiday has shifted even in the last 100 years and has become much more of a unifying, where I'm trying to find something in common with all Americans. And yet, in study after study, people bring something to the table that reminds them of where they're actually from. So it's not just about what we do here in America. It's like, what did your great-grandmother do back wherever she was from? And how do you show that on the table? Mm-hmm.
As an anthropologist, I always find very interesting when we talk about tradition, because Boris was saying you never do the turkey the way you should be doing it, but then when you discuss a little more, you hear that people are coming with, I don't know, Italian food or Iranian food, never mind. And it's always interesting because tradition is something that we talk a lot about, but then when we do it, we always do it in a different way. The good tradition doesn't exist, and that's what's nice about it. So
yeah. Well, I remember in the 60s, one of my cousins gave up eating meat, and so we had to have a tofu turkey. And my aunts were beyond understanding that. And I'm sure the Pilgrim Fathers would have been horrified if you have the choice between a bird and grain. Why would you choose just the grain? But that's a story for another day.
So you're very inclusive because everybody ate the tofu turkey, or you did the both?
No. It was just my cousin, and the rest of us weren't sure to do. So. And then she realized that she had no gravy. And that was because all the gravy was from the turkey, and so it had turkey broth in it, and so it wasn't vegetarian. And yeah, and it's like, no, this is not a fast. This is not like, you know, something you would eat for a fast. This is a celebration. This is a feast, and that includes everything. You want to eat everything. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what about Switzerland? I guess you cannot find any cranberries sauce, or maybe people are trying
well,
to.
You can find cranberries
find
and make the sauce. yeah, of course. And just like you said, I'm very proud of my recipe.
As well we should be.
And the gravy is also very important, so you have to like, I chop a lot of celery and carrots and onions and shallots and garlic, and so all the turkey cooking all day, you can gather all the juice, the broth, and then make gravy with that, and spread it on the mashed potatoes. So yeah, do it all from scratch.
So I'm sure you're making a more accurate Thanksgiving than anyone in the US, maybe.
Not an accurate.
Maybe we can go back a little bit to history, because there's something missing. So the first one was in 60-20, and then there was another one in 60-30, which was not very nice. I mean, celebrating something a little more, like, wow. And when did it become a very a national holiday? When did everybody started celebrating Thanksgiving?
Well, as Kathleen was pointing out at the onset, it's always been complicated. There isn't a moment when it's simple and then it becomes complicated. It's complicated from the word go. And then it's further complicated by the emergence of the United States of America 160 years down the line, and then the US starts wondering, where do we come from? Well, why not from these founding fathers or founding pilgrims and the celebrated Plymouth Rock with its wonderful date and in its wonderful almond shape in the sand of Plymouth and that sort of thing. And so the story works retrospectively, right? This is who we are. We are the descendants of these people who came across the Atlantic in search of a better life, in search of religious freedom, who preferred to confront the hardships of crossing the Atlantic, living in what the predicators of the time called the howling wilderness, rather than live under the yoke of the Church of England in England and other places in Europe. It's worth remembering that these Puritans, these pilgrims, are a minority amongst these many, many thousands of migrants coming to the American shores. They are, it's a minority report. Right? It's a minority report, and yet it is that which sticks in history, right? And it's a constant point of reference, aided by the fact that we come together, aided by the fact that we eat well together, that we celebrate together, so it reinforces the story. Maybe later we'll talk about the films and movies and poems that celebrate Thanksgiving also, right? But it's until much later, 1863, in the midst of the Civil War, that Thanksgiving becomes an official, for the first time, an official national holiday in the US, right? And this is a very important date, 1863. We're in the middle of the Civil War, which is effectively tearing the United States apart. At this point, it's the disunited States of America. 1863, it is unclear whether the South or the North will win the war. We're a few months before Gettysburg, which is really the tilting point of the war. But up until then, it's really unclear. So President Abraham Lincoln, once again, seeks to come up with something that would bring Americans together, and he proposes Thanksgiving as a national celebration, remembering the Thanksgiving of the 17th century, And then, almost 100 years later, 80 years later, Roosevelt, in 1943, in the midst of another war, the Second World War, fixes Thanksgiving on the last Thursday in November, and there it was for political reasons, right? So we see how the politics changes, but the idea of bringing the nation together is something that is always there. And you're an anthropologist. What brings people together better than a dining table, right? And food in abundance, and something good, and something that makes us happy. Voila. That's your Thanksgiving in a rather big nutshell.
But don't tell me that you never argue on Thanksgiving.
That's what Thanksgiving's for.
So I would also like to point out that the first American holiday was Independence Day, the 4th of July. The second national holiday was George Washington's birthday. And the third national holiday of the nation was Thanksgiving Day under Abraham Lincoln. So it has been a very large part of the American story since it has been a country. And so different people are constantly trying to find a way to make it relevant to what's going on now. And so sometimes it's like the Pilgrims are useful, but that story of two different groups of people who barely knew each other, sitting at the same table and getting along, that's the important part of the story that lingers. That's the lesson. Mm-hmm.
But do you have to be American to celebrate Thanksgiving?
Of course not.
No.
I don't think so.
That's it. I'm sorry. That's a little provocative, but
the Pilgrims weren't.
I mean,
That's a great point. They weren't American. They weren't. But you know, we're talking about Thanksgiving and the United States of America. But if you look at any nation around the world, you will find that they have some sort of emergence myth of that sort. Right? I mean, we're here in Switzerland. The people talk about Guillaume Tell, right? Whether he ever existed or not. Maybe he did. Maybe the story really happened the way it's told in museums here, right? But whatever the case may be, it has strictly nothing to do with modern Switzerland. Zero. Zip. And so it's a moment that is taken from the past and in order to create the present and revive the present. That's why the pilgrims are constantly invited to the Thanksgiving table, but also to all political tables in the US, right? The city upon the hill, a few years later, is a phrase from that era that just about all American presidents use at one point in their career, independently of whether they're Republican or Democrat, right? So you find it in the mouth of Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama and JFK. Everybody constantly uses this moment of history in order to say, okay, this is where we are, this is who we are, this is where we're coming from, right? And Thanksgiving is this yearly celebration, religious in the broad sense of the word, of who we are, and this is what brings us together.
Kathleen, do you want to add something?
There's just so much going on here. So this is really great because I spent a lot of time focused on just the 17th century part of it, like if they were eating, what were they eating, how were they preparing the food. One of the things I love about this museum, Pilgrim Hall Museum, is one of the first objects that was collected by the museum was a cooking pot that came through Miles Standish's family that was from the 17th century. That is very likely a cooking pot that was at the first Thanksgiving, and if it wasn't there, there were lots of pots just like it that were there. And I love it because it's kind of huge, and you could fit easily a half a dozen ducks in there and maybe 2 or 3 pounds of turnips, and I can just imagine cooking in it. And I just love that that's the sort of everyday thing that got saved by a family. That was, they didn't bring a lot of fancy stuff over in 1620. They brought the things they needed. They brought tools to build houses. They brought pots to cook their food in. They brought clothes to keep them warm. And they wore those things out. They used them until they didn't exist anymore. So those few fragments that are left just really delights me. And that the pot was broken and the family saved it anyhow. I just love it. Yeah.
I'm so jealous. I don't have that kind of pot in my collection. But I have many nice things too, but not that one specifically. Yeah. So do you have any question you would like to ask to Kathleen, or the other way around, or can we open the conversation to the floor, or what do you have anything you want to say, Boris?
Oh, I find absolutely extraordinary the anecdote of the pot, and I think that it also says something about how our relationship to food has changed over time, and how in that 17th century those people who barely survived the first winter celebrated it by eating something that they probably didn't eat every day. Because the amount of time, of energy devoted to cooking, to hunting, to gathering it would take to prepare a meal like that would be extraordinary. On a day-to-day basis, it was impossible. There was too much work to do, right? And so I wondered if at the Pilgrim Hall, whether there is some sort of reflection also on how we currently live in a society of excess, right? We have too much food all the time. Thanksgiving is also a response to the scarcity through which those people lived throughout the year, and then there were a few occasions during the year when their meals were plentiful and you rested from work and that sort of thing. As a culinarian, do you also work with notions like that? This notions of scarcity and excess that seem so preoccupying for us today.
Oh, absolutely. There's such a seasonality is so important in the 17th century and in the 18th century too. So there are certain times of year where, this is why you have to look and see what fish are available. So you're not just fishing randomly. If someone is eating fish in October, that's a very specific fish. It isn't sometimes a very different fish than what you're eating in March. And so you're looking through the sources, but you're also looking, well, where are they fishing now? Where are those animals now? The same with the wildfowl. They're more plentiful at certain times of year than other. Happen to be very plentiful in the winter. They talk about the ducks that you want to eat are the ones who eat delicate salads under the water. And there are different breeds of ducks that eat fish. You don't want those on your table because they do not taste good. They don't taste like fish and they don't taste like duck. They taste like something that's in between. So those are not the fish. Those are not the ducks you want on your table. So, they're learning about these different sorts of things. When your harvest comes in, that's when you have the most bread. You have your grain, you're grinding your grain. They don't have a mill in 1621. They don't have a mill for another 10 years. So they are pounding grain in mortars and pestles. So one of the sounds that you would have heard in Plymouth Colony all through the winter is that thump, thump, thump. of them hitting that pestle into the mortar to pound the corn. And that's something even a child of 3 or 4 could do, not all day, but you know, they're all put to it. Everyone knows like somebody needs to be doing that throughout the course of the day to keep bread on the table, to keep porridge on the table. So there's and what's in your garden? Why do we eat roots? Why are we eating turnips and carrots and parsnips and onions on Thanksgiving? It's because that's what's available in the garden, because the frost has killed off the lettuce and the cucumbers and those other sorts of things. Why do we have pumpkin pie? Because you can harvest your pumpkins before the frost and they'll keep through the course of the winter if you know how to take care of them. So that's, you know, and the same with your apples. Once they finally plant apple trees here in New England, you harvest your apples in the fall, and some of those varieties will keep throughout the course of the winter and into the spring. So that's, you know, there's a lot of the traditional Thanksgiving menu that's still on American tables that has everything to do with what was available 300 years ago. Because nowadays you can go to the freezer section, you can find anything. I can find mangoes. I can find fresh mangoes all year long. There are no mangoes that grow in Massachusetts. They come from someplace else, and they come from different someplace else's, so that they're always there in my grocery store. And that's something that they didn't have. That's something they didn't have in the 17th century or the 18th century. So that's important to remember too. Oh, I'm so hungry now. You're making me talk about food all morning.
Yeah, actually, that's something, that's a point I wanted to come to, because we're in the food museum and we are trying to prepare a new exhibition, I mean, pieces of a new big exhibition for June. And we are working on the article by the Lancet. It's commissioned by the Lancet, who is wondering how we are going to feed the people in 2050 in a way that is good for the environment and good for the people, I mean, for our body. And I mean, you said it, Boris, we are in an age of abundance, but this abundance is not everywhere, not for everybody, and it's not going to last. Absolutely. As long as we know. So as much as we know. And so I was wondering if when people give gratitude on Thanksgiving Day today, they still are thankful for the food they have on the table, or is it something nobody cares about anymore?
I think that's a great question, because we have been speaking of Thanksgiving essentially as a symbolic act, right? And the food is there essentially symbolically. Nobody eats the turkey, the cranberry sauce, the wonderful gravy, and the mashed potatoes, and the squash, and the pecan pie, and all the rest because they're hungry. Nobody arrives at the Thanksgiving dinner because they're hungry. Everybody's, if anything, everybody's already stuffed with the takeaway they ate on the plane or in the car on the way to dinner. So the thanking is certainly not for the food per se. The food is there symbolically. And so it does pose all sorts of problems. For instance, this year, I looked this up, I wouldn't know, but Americans will spend about shy of $1 billion on turkey alone this year. That's millions of tons of turkey, which is an extraordinary ecological impact and ecological waste, because I don't know what percentage, but a significant percentage of whatever will be served next Thursday will go to waste. Nobody's going to eat that because there's going to be too much food. And so thinking of that, whether turkey should be served, whether turkey that size should be served, whether it could be replaced by something else, are all not just culinary questions, but also political questions, right? Do I need that much food? Do I need to consume that much meat, for instance? I am not, you know, what we think of that is neither here or there. But these are real questions. These are real questions, and the gratitude certainly is no longer for, thank you, Lord, for letting us survive another year. Thank you, America, for bringing us and keeping us alive. It's something else. It's something else, and if we want this to last in the US and around the world, clearly, who is invited to the table, how we share the food at this metaphorical table are questions of the future, certainly, right? And what we're grateful for. These are very important questions.
And it's also a very good way to remember that we don't like food, and maybe in everyday life we don't give thanks for the food on the table, but at Thanksgiving we remember, oh yeah, thank you for this food, and so that's a good remembering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So turkey, it's interesting because when I was growing up, turkey was available at Thanksgiving time, and then again for Christmas, for those who had turkey at Christmas. But in the last 10 years, you can buy turkey all year round, like they're in the freezer case all year round, and turkey parts. So you don't have to buy a whole turkey. You can buy 2 turkey legs, or you can buy a turkey breast. And it was interesting that some of the food magazines this year had how to do a Thanksgiving dinner for 4 people, not just 40 people. Which started with, you buy a turkey breast, and then this is how you cut it up, and then this is what you do with the leftovers. Whereas 10 years ago, everything was a whole turkey. Martha Stewart Living had beautiful roasted turkeys on her cover. She did not have 2 turkey legs on the cover of her magazine, or hasn't yet. So that's sort of a shift in we've become used to having what used to be a special occasion meal all year long in a different sort of way. And so now you can have lots of recipes for turkey. It's not just for November and December. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Is there any questions in the... Do you want to ask something to Kathleen or...
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is.
You're all bashful. Mm-hmm.
So, do you want to add something, anything? I think we've talked about a lot of things already, but I'm sure we've got some. So, Kathleen, is there anything?
I just want to say my favorite holiday in America is the day after Thanksgiving, which is Eat Pie for Breakfast Day. And having been raised in New England, we used to eat pie for breakfast on every occasion we could. So I'm just glad it has its own recognition. I highly recommend pie for breakfast. It just starts your day off on the right foot.
I was worried you were going to talk about Black Friday. So that's bad.
No, I avoid that. I avoid that. That is not a day I go shopping or online. I eat pie for breakfast and go from there.
Actually, there's something we haven't discussed is why a Thursday? Does anyone know about that? Why is it on a Thursday?
The date of Thanksgiving changed over time for 300 years. I mean, the original one, if you will, or the first one celebrated on the shores of. Maybe it wasn't the first one, by the way, because there is a strife between Virginia and Massachusetts to determine who celebrated the first Thanksgiving. But I'm not going to go into that. I have no fight in that dog, as they say. But more importantly, it changed over time, right? And then Lincoln fixed that as a national holiday, the third national holiday, and then Roosevelt in 39 put it in November, last Thursday of November, also for economic reasons, right? It was far enough from Christmas, and it was a way of stimulating business, drumming up business at a period of the year which is pretty dull otherwise. So it served also an economic purpose in the midst of the 1929 Great Depression. So yes, and it's a Thursday, which gives people a holiday. It extends the weekend and that sort of thing.
In the 17th century, Thursdays, the minister might have an extra, not quite a sermon day, but kind of a test sermon day. So you could have a lesson on Thursday night. So it was like time to go out, meet up with people, do something good. So, and those extra services were on Thursdays for the most part. And so there is thinking that sort of tradition of a Thursday service, that extra service was why Thursday was chosen, but it's not entirely clear. Mm-hmm. But it is great for retail.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting because it always serves a purpose which, as we were saying earlier, is at the intersection of anthropological needs, religious needs, and political needs, right? And you bring the three together, and it all ties up nicely together, and you repeat it, and the story gets traction, right? You know, over time, and it's repeated in popular culture. It's repeated in novels, etc. And even if if you know nothing about America and you watch any popular show, such as Friends or How I Met Your Mother or The Big Bang Theory or anything, at some point there's Thanksgiving, and you know, this is an American show, and it anchors the seasonality of the seasons of the show, and it anchors it as an American show, and it's always a special episode, right? All these shows have a special Christmas episode and a special Thanksgiving episode, right? So all these cultural moments only exist because we repeat them. They have no existence outside of the repetition of them, right? If you know, for some reason we stopped repeating them, they disappear. They only exist because we do them, right?
Boris, I don't like to contradict, but a lot of times Thanksgiving will fall on the last Thursday, but officially it's the fourth Thursday.
It is the fourth, yes.
Sorry, I'm being
exactly.
picky, but in case anybody ever wants to celebrate next year, fourth.
It's fourth, yes,
That's
exactly. There's 5 Thursdays, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Well, thank you. That's all right. I admit to be contradicted on a technicality.
More important than Christmas, or is it on the same level, or I don't know if it is pertinent to compare both, but.
Do you want to take this one? I have something to say, but please.
Okay. Well, I think Christmas is also related to Christianism, and so there's Jewish families that celebrate Thanksgiving but won't celebrate Christmas. So I think it's not the same celebration, and I wouldn't know how to more important, like an emphasis.
Because of the religion, okay.
I mean, there's Muslim families and Jewish families that celebrate Thanksgiving that won't celebrate Christmas.
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because the relationship between political power and religious power in the U.S. is both very clear and very ambiguous. On the one hand, the U.S. is an extremely secular country. On the other hand, everything in American politics resonates with religious values, right? And so Christmas is, as its name says, a Christian feast, and there are many confessions and many different religions and many persuasions, religious persuasions in the U.S. So not everybody celebrates celebrates Christmas, even though it is still a major celebration. But Thanksgiving takes the upper hand, as it were, because it crosses into all the majority of ethnic groups and religious groups and something like that, right? It's this extraordinary shift from religion into secular religion in the U.S., and Thanksgiving is one of the anchor points of that. Yeah, it's a great question.
So the Pilgrims actually didn't celebrate Thanksgiving. In 1622, in 1622, a group of men asked if they could not work that day. And when they came back, they were playing stool ball and other games. And William Bradford very gleefully put an end to their games and said they should not play while others worked. And so for years, their Christmas was not openly celebrated in New England, which is another reason why you want to celebrate your harvest, because you don't got anything to look forward to in the middle of December. So that's kind of an interesting twist on that too, that he felt that we should celebrate Christmas all the time and not just on one particular day in the year. So.
Can I say my question in French? Je me gêne de parler en anglais maintenant. Alors, when I met Wave, she told me about how she celebrates Thanksgiving in Switzerland. And one thing I thought was, I was curious about one thing. You say you always have a special guest. That's the person who never celebrated Thanksgiving. So it's like c'est comme une intronisation. So what happens? What do these people say? These innocent people who never had the turkey the right way, they come to your house, they have this moment of celebration, the ritual. How do they, what kind of feedback do they give you? Comment ces invités qui viennent chez toi célébrer Thanksgiving pour la première fois, qui sont innocents, qui ont certainement des stéréotypes aussi, comment est-ce qu'ils vivent cette expérience, Wave?
I think they're grateful. Like I said at the beginning, at first I was inviting like 20 people because I really want to invite everybody, but it's a lot of work, and also when you're 20 at a table, it's hard to talk with everybody. So in the last few years, I started doing like smaller Thanksgiving, like around 12 people, so that everybody could actually talk together and spend time together. And but yeah, it's really important for me that each year there's someone that like has never experienced Thanksgiving, and I think that it's very exotic, I think, for my Swiss friends to experience Thanksgiving. And as you were saying, they also have like all these images from pop culture, and I think they live with a sense, like a feeling of warmth, of human warmth, and a very full belly, and yeah, I think they're really joyful when they leave.
Is it actually a tradition to try to invite someone who was foreigner or was never at the Thanksgiving? Because being a foreigner in New York, I kind of felt that everyone wanted two others for Thanksgiving. I mean, they needed their Indians or their foreigners at the table.
Yes, when you live in Europe, and Christmas approaches, right? All of a sudden, you have all those papers, all those features on TV, the radio, etc., that say, "Oh, solitude is terrible. Being alone is terrible when Christmas approaches," as if it were easy to be alone the rest of the year, right? And so Thanksgiving is also this moment of realization that some people are alone, some people are without a family, without friends, etc. And all of a sudden, on many people, dawns this, this duty that people should not be left alone. And so if they know of a colleague, an exchange student, a friend who's from out of town, as we say, or out of the country, then you invite them over, right? And then they're initiated in this ritual, which may be a little bit foreign and exotic to some of them. But more importantly, it is the sense that the table that's shared is also an extended table that extends to all those, at least hopefully, who are alone that day, right? So it is also a moment of realization, not of what we have, but the fact that others don't have. It's the, yeah. Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. And I hear the turkeys being massaged even as we speak.
So everybody's invited at Waves, please.
Yeah. Can't wait.
Any question? No? So maybe to conclude, I would like, maybe it's a little intrusive, but if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about how you're going to celebrate Thanksgiving? Are you going to celebrate it? What are you going to have for Thanksgiving? And with who?
Well, actually, I am digesting Thanksgiving because we celebrated last night. Because so in the U.S. We celebrate on Thursdays because also Friday is a holiday. But in Switzerland, I celebrate on Saturday because people, otherwise on Thursday at 9 p.m. people are like, okay, tomorrow there's work. So on Saturday people can stay longer and really enjoy the Thanksgiving evening. And so it's not, I'm taking like a little freedom from the tradition, so it's not on the right day. And it's always, okay, so which Saturday works better for everyone? So we actually celebrated Thanksgiving last night. And so we had obviously turkey and mashed potatoes and green beans and pumpkin soup and pumpkin pie. And I'm forgetting something. And pecan pie, obviously. And yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you. So we're getting angry.
Yeah.
So my American colleagues from the university who are the American government on exile here in Switzerland will be preparing Thanksgiving dinner, and we're invited, and I can't wait. And so that's going to be that. Because when you're abroad, right, that this is that piece of America you bring along, right? The Swiss, when they're abroad, they have people send them some cheese, and they fix their fondue, or they just eat their cheese. It's the cliche, right? What the Swiss always miss is their cheese, and so you know, as an American abroad, what you bring about is Thanksgiving, at least. And so once a year, there's this moment of pride and celebration.
Are you bringing something to the party, or you're just? I mean, no, I'm curious. Is it like is it a Canadian thing, or everybody's bring something, or is it?
If it were in the U.S., I would bring a six-pack of import beer. But since everything is import beer here, it's easy.
What about you, Kathleen?
So the great irony is I live in Plymouth. I work at a museum called Pilgrim Hall. We are open to the public on Thanksgiving Day. It is a very busy day for us. I will probably squeeze a turkey sandwich in somehow, but I will have a Thanksgiving dinner with my family at some later point, closer to Christmas.
So it's interesting because nobody is going to celebrate Thanksgiving on the actual
Thanksgiving, yeah.
Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my point about tradition. I was just testing you, and I
Yeah.
said that I was right. Tradition
Yeah.
is something that everybody invents, and that's great.
Of course.
Yeah.
Anything else? Do you want to? No.
Peut-être que vous avez... Je crois que presque tout le monde, sauf Boris, tu n'as pas pu encore savourer la dégustation que Madame Fasbin nous a apportée. We had our little Thanksgiving a few minutes ago in our kitchen because one of our guests agreed to cook for us. We had like 4 or 5 dishes, all in miniature, but we could get a taste of it, and I would like to thank you, Barbara. It was excellent. Some leftovers can be shared still.
There were 3 desserts, so it's yeah.
And Jello. There's always space for Jello.
It's interesting. We're having a debate here about Jello. I don't know what you think about it, but is it important for you, Jello? No. Okay, so I think we can conclude there. Yeah, we are going to have a drink. We're sorry about Kathleen, you cannot join us. It's so sad. Maybe someday you can come here for. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely want to come see your pot. So at some point, I will come to Paris. Thank you so much for being here with us on a Sunday, and have a great Thanksgiving.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful. Yeah.
Merci à Boris, merci à Wave. On va partager un verre si ça vous convient. Merci. Vous êtes tous invités. Bye bye, Kathleen.
Bye bye. Okay.